It's very interesting seeing a student dunking on him like this. That shocked me. From the moment when I saw that clip, I said, fuck, I need to watch the whole thing. So I thought we'll do it together. Like, this guy's a, PhD professional debater, does that for a living, basically. And these are just students. These are just kids, and liberal kids, basically. You could argue that some of them, if not most, voted for Kamala. Oh man, like Jordan is good at not saying anything, to be honest. He's like fucking Neo dodging bullets. That's the other thing, man. He's behaving like such a dismissive, arrogant dick. Hello, gringos y gringas, beaners and beanerettes. Welcome back to El Racist Latino. Today I want to do another watch along, this time with this Jordan Peterson JUBILEE thing that happened. I have seen clips of this from previous, Ben Shapiro and others. But it's the first time that I see a full episode of this. And so I don't really know how the rules work, and we'll find out together. Full disclosure though, I have seen that one clip that I guess everybody has seen, the one that's going mega viral, of these kids super mega dunking on Jordan. And yeah, my personal views is I have mixed views, because I think that his message is overall positive, you can say. We can argue on nuances, but is masculinity is not bad, and be religious, believe in God and all this stuff. And I have mixed feelings because he doesn't seem to be practicing those messages. There's no coercion. No, that coercion, that's the wrong word. Coherence, I guess. Coherence, yeah, maybe, between his actions and his message. So that's the only thing that kind of, I don't like. But if you read his book, it's great. It's just kind of ignore where it's coming from, let's say. The message is actually not bad. So, of course, let's go already, I think. You can move. Of course, for context, for the people that don't know, let's say, I don't think there's many, but just in case, this is a professional, one of the most famous debaters in the world, PhD, doctor, top of the intelligentsia of the current one, let's say, when it comes to psychology. And yeah, it's I've seen it's very interesting seeing a student dunking on him like this. That shocked me. From the moment when I saw that clip, I said, fuck, I need to watch the whole thing. So I thought we'll do it together. And yeah, oh yeah, I always forget, please, to like and follow if you like the stuff. I don't like bothering people with that. Oh yeah, I also thought it would be fun to keep score. Since it's already a kid dunking on him, then maybe we should keep score and see if Jordan or the kids win. So if Jordan wins an argument, he gets 1 point. If the kids win, they get 1 point, so forth. So let's do it.
Hello there, I'm Dr. Jordan Peterson. I'm a clinical psychologist, a professor emeritus at the University of Toronto, an author, a podcaster, public speaker, and today I'm surrounded by 25 atheists. My first claim: atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting.
Good afternoon, Dr. Peterson.
How you doing?
So this claim here that atheists don't know what they're rejecting. My background is in studying to become a traditional Catholic priest, daily mass, daily rosary, going on long retreats, deep into the magisterium and biblical hermeneutics, like I was thoroughly in it. And it seems like I do know what I'm missing. Is there something that I missed over years of study, both this issue formally and living out religion so deeply?
Well, you obviously feel that you missed something when you were practicing for the priesthood. Your aim was off then. So there's always the possibility that it's still off now.
What was off about my aim in the first place?
I don't know. That might take a long time to figure out. But
then it seems kind of like this no true Scotsman type of fallacy in which you're the arbiter of people's aims and how they understand those aims to be. How is it that you can claim that people don't know something that you know about their life despite not having met them?
Well, it's obviously a generic claim, just like the atheists claim that there's no God is a generic claim. In your case, it would have to be specified more, and I'm not claiming to understand what was going on in your mind, but my experience with atheists is twofold, is that they have a very reductive notion of what constitutes God, let's say in the Judeo-Christian tradition, and they've often been hurt by someone who was religious or by the religious enterprise or perhaps by God himself, so to speak, and that's left them with an animus.
But I think that you have a reductive view of what atheism is. You've defined religion so broadly to include any sort of having aim in life, any sort of cultural archetypes, or having a metaphorical substrate. And atheism to you is a very specific type of like three people in the world that are these Raskolnikov type of, they want to get away with a perfect murder. It seems like you have the reductive view of what an atheist is.
Well, let's start with your claim. How do you define the God that you're rejecting? Like, what is God to you? You studied in the church, you found that unsatisfactory. How would you characterize what you rejected?
I think the average Christian believer, when they say that they're Christian and they believe, they mean some sort of God that is all-powerful, all-perfect, is somehow involved in the matters of this world, and that we look to them through wisdom and with the Logos incarnate in Christ. And it also seems like you don't believe in religion in the way that the average Christian says that they believe in religion. And there are as many gods out there as there are believers, because everybody has mutually exclusive and different views of what God is. So it seems
well,
like...
if everybody had mutually exclusive views of what God is, no one could speak to each other. The mere fact of communication
That's what we do now.
presumes a commonality of assumption and definition. And it's certainly not the case that I regard any archetypal manifestation whatsoever as equally religious. So that's not a real claim. Let me give you an example. For example, there's a sub-narrative in the story of Moses where Moses is rewarded with a glimpse of God. Okay, and that's one of the ways that God is characterized in the Old Testament stories.
Yes.
Now, Moses is a faithful servant of God and a good man. At least that's the case within the confines of the story.
One possible interpretation.
It's the case within the confines of the story, obviously.
Obviously. When we look at the Bible can't precisely say anything because there are so many different exegetical and hermeneutic views of this particular book, and that everybody has everybody has disagreed historically on, it seems like, even the most benign detail about a book this big. And it seems like you can only say that the Bible says something if you first presuppose that it's univocal.
So your claim essentially is that Moses in the Old Testament plays the role of a villain or is irrelevant? Because the alternative claim is that he's good. I'm saying that we can't know,
because we can't talk to those authors.
If you are going to start with the presupposition that there's nothing I can say about any of these stories that you're not going to disagree with from the perspective that there are multiple potential competing claims, then I can't speak with you. So
we also have a short time here, so I want to get to the core of what you're arguing here, and I'd love if we could...
The core of what I'm arguing is that atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting. So I'm trying to give you an example of what's being rejected and its complexity. Okay, so God rewards Moses with a glimpse of the divine. So this is a definition of the God that atheists are hypothetically rejecting.
A possible one.
I said I didn't say the. I said
What a dickhead.
That is possible, yes.
Okay. So despite the fact that Moses is a stellar character and he's had a long and difficult life and can withstand a lot of difficulty and travail, God puts him between two cliffs. So he can just see a crack of what's in front of him. And when God walks by, he allows him to see his back. Okay, so the implication of that story is that the divine is fundamentally unknowable. It's a pinnacle experience, and that people in their finitude have to be shielded from a comprehensive vision of the basis of reality. Well, that's not the God that's defined in that manner, right? It's not a simple personification. It's not a simple old man in the sky. It's something that in its essence is unknowable and overwhelming. And that isn't, in my experience, the God that's defined by atheists who are attempting to undermine the story. I mean, it's the same claim, for example, that you're a finite creature and that you face something that in the final analysis is unknowable, and that you have to establish a relationship with it regardless of your inability to perceive or even withstand perceiving the whole. Okay, is there a problem with that?
I mean, the problem is that when we look at, famously, when you've been asked, do you believe in God? The question becomes, what do we mean by God? And in the Bible, it's not even clear the biblical authors know what God is, because Yahweh has historically emerged from an early storm god, a deity that doesn't exhaust the category of deity, and that has changed over the Old Testament. Does God have physicality? Does God not have physicality? It seems like, yes, if you define religion to mean anybody that has an aim, anybody that looks at the unknown, anybody who wants to go from chaos to order is inherently religious, then yes. But also in the same way, I could define atheist as somebody who doesn't dogmatically believe in a religion, or somebody who doesn't regularly attend religious services or belong to a denomination. Help especially the audience kind of like boil this down. There was a lot of words there. That the central claim is that we exist somewhere between the finite and the infinite.
A central claim.
A central claim is that we exist somewhere between the finite and the infinite.
No, I said that we were finite and we had to establish a relationship with the infinite.
Yeah, then in that case, then we're all religious, but then I can do the same thing and define one particular element of atheism. It seems like we both have a reductive view of what the other side looks like, to the point where a conversation seems incoherent, and not just incoherent, but not in the way that the average Christian understands Christianity to be.
Do you have a
Okay,
problem?
let's pause there. Sorry, you've been voted out by the majority.
Okay, well, I'm impressed. You know, I heard already, because this clip that is going viral, I obviously didn't see just one post. Like, this guy's a, PhD professional debater, does that for a living, basically. And these are just students. These are just kids, and liberal kids, basically. You could argue that some of them, if not most, voted for Kamala, that kind of university type, I don't know. Maybe. I don't want to generalize, but this could be the kind of people that we're talking about. We have a pretty high chance that this is the case. So, I mean, they didn't actually debate the fact that the atheists don't understand what they're rejecting. They went somewhere. Basically, it was the first attack. It's the first attack that we have seen that Jordan doesn't really identify his God, what he believes in, but he's just, moving the conversation towards what is God and all this philosophy to avoid the answer. I don't know what he's thinking, why is he doing it, but he's avoiding it, let's say. And then, they had this battle of what is God. That was not really the question. So I don't even know who won this. I think it's a tie, to be honest, because they both gave really good. I mean, they deviated from the main argument both, but in their deviation, they both gave decent argument. None of them, in my personal opinion, none of them struck home. It's nothing that I haven't seen before or heard before. So, yeah, let's leave it at a tie. So let's not add any points for now. And yeah, let's keep going. Oh, and before we keep going, did you notice that they changed it? It was supposed to be a Christian versus 20 atheists, and they changed it after the viral clip. They changed it to Jordan Peterson. If you haven't seen the viral clip, then you will understand once we go through it, but it's exactly about this. It's hilarious. Let's keep going.
Hey, how's it going? Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you,
David.
David, good to see you.
Tell me everything that you know about the Polynesian deity Lono, L-O-N-O.
I don't know anything about the Polynesian deity Lono.
So you're rejecting something without knowledge of what you're rejecting.
I'm not rejecting it. No more than I'm rejecting
do you believe in
anything
Lono?
that I don't know anything about.
Do you believe in Lono? Do you believe that he is a deity that exists in the world, exists in the universe, that exists in the existence of everything? Do you believe that Lono
I'll
is a
answer that
being?
question once you answer my question, which is, do I reject everything that I'm ignorant of? Because that's your presupposition that undergirds your argument, and unless you can prove that that's valid, then there's no point.
My question is quite simple.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean it's formulated accurately.
Do you believe that Lono exists? True. Yes or no?
I'm not going to answer that question for the reasons I just described. You already insisted that if I reject something, that if I'm ignorant of something, I reject it. Do you think that everyone in the world has to know everything simultaneously for that to be valid and true?
I think in order for your argument to be true, in order for it to be true that we atheists don't understand what we're rejecting, then you need to also apply that to yourself and to Christians and to Muslims and to any other person on this earth, where if you don't understand what you're rejecting the belief in, then you can't reject the belief in it. That's the implication of your claim.
I didn't say that I rejected the belief in Lona. I said I didn't know who Lono was. I didn't say anything about rejecting.
That's because I've asked you several times and you haven't. But let me get to my even greater point. Mm-hmm. You're saying atheists don't understand what religion is or what God is in order to be able to reject it fully or completely. We have someone over here who studied it in their own way. I've studied religion. I have a degree in religious studies, specialty in Christianity and Mediterranean traditions. And further than that, beyond me, Pew Research studies suggest that atheists and agnostics actually know more about religion and about religious stories, the foundational principles, than believers.
That's because they're more religious than they think they are.
Okay.
They're concerned with deep matters, and one of the defining characteristics of someone who's oriented in a religious direction is that they're concerned with deep matters.
Okay.
In fact, it's virtually definitional.
Right, but they also have to identify with a religious tradition and accept the foundational stories that go along with that.
Well, that would mean more that they're sectarian than that they're religious. And most people, for example, in the United States, deny that they're religious but accept that they're spiritual.
Let's pause there. You've been voted out by the majority.
Well, this kid was horrible. The fuck this, like, you can see that this question was itching in his brain from the time he was taking 10 showers, obviously, by the wetness of his hair. Before he came there, his ass was not even in the chair before he was spouted out, "Do you believe in Lono?" You know, the fuck is Lono, man? Sounds like, I don't know, Moana's cousin or something, like, horrible. And like he said, is formulated, like, the question, I see his point, but the question is formulated wrongly. First of all, I don't think that Jordan Peterson claims that if you reject something, that Christ is sending everybody to hell, regardless regardless of the ignorance of him. So Christians say that you need to go to Christ so you can go to heaven. If not, you go to hell. Doesn't mean that everybody who doesn't believe in Christ is going to hell. And his argument, I mean, that's one way to see it. His argument that if you don't know it, then you don't believe in it, then yeah, it's just a horrible question. I mean, Jordan won this one, but because of the ineptitude of the other dude, and he just got nervous through it. You could see that he got horrible performance for the kid, and or for the guy. He was a bit older, I guess. So 1 point to Jordan, and let's keep going.
Aha! Hi, nice to meet you.
How are you doing?
Good, how are you?
What's your name?
I'm Greg, nice to meet you.
Greg.
Okay, so I feel like you're getting at this idea of polysemy, where we have multiple related meanings for a word, right? Like, for example, a famous painting can be emotionally moving in that it changes my emotional state. And when I was on the highway coming here to the studio, I was physically moving. I was changing my position. If I said, I believe the Mona Lisa is very moving, and you said, you don't really understand what you're saying, it's nailed to the wall, I would say that you're the one who doesn't understand what I'm saying, not the other way around. And the way that relates to this is there are many concepts of God, and I'll admit, I find a lot of what you say about that interesting. I'm familiar with it. The idea of this kind of Jungian hierarchical thing, or as a metaphor or a symbol, or the kind of, atheist, materialist, literalist idea of agentic, omnipotent, omniscient being that intervenes in reality, right? So when I'm saying that I reject the concept of God, I'm aware of these other definitions of God, but I think that when we use words, we tend to only imply one meaning at a time. So the same way that I would say the Mona Lisa is moving emotionally, but I would not say it's moving physically. I would say I reject the concept of God in this very literal way. But
What literal way?
the way that God is this omniscient, omnipotent, agentic, supernatural being that sent his son down and has, caused miracles and all these things like that. The idea of God is
Do you think that there's an underlying unity of things?
Could you explain that question?
Well, scientists, for example, believe that science unifies in a comprehensive theory. Do you, yes, no, or that there are multiple competing truths? Those are the options. Either things unify or there are multiple competing truths.
I know that, for example, like in physics, people are looking for like a theory of everything.
And why do you think they're doing that?
It's interesting, it's helpful.
But they also believe that there's an underlying unity to things.
In a sense, yeah, like like the material world and time and space are probably governed by universal laws and principles?
Partly that, yes, yes, but that the same thing might extend to a broader domain that would include imagination and value.
Could you help me connect that to the prompt?
Well, I'm trying to define God, the God that I don't think atheists do a very good job of defining. Here's another question for you. What do you think guides you in your determination of whether or not what you're saying to me is true?
Can we go back? Can we stay on what we were talking about?
We are.
Okay.
You're just uncomfortable with the question.
No, I feel like you're just kind of throwing different spaghetti at the wall.
I'm not.
Okay.
I asked you a very specific question. What is it that you think guides you when you're talking to me to help you determine whether what you say is true?
Logic, memory, reasoning, sensory information.
How do you distinguish that from being governed by something that's false?
An interesting question.
How do you know the difference when you speak between what's true and what's false? So you could imagine.
I infer, right? I can infer.
From what principles?
So, and what are you getting at?
I'm getting at the fact that your conscience guides you. Is that reasonable?
Conscious is defined by my empathy and my reason are my foundational.
Define it any way you want.
Okay, so that's how I'm defining my conscience. Is my my conscience is my sense of
right
and wrong. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah,
Where does that come from?
I would say that comes from an evolved capacity to empathize and a recognition of the benefits of engaging with and nurturing that capacity. And then that empathy is constrained and guided by reason, right? Like, for example, I am driving down the highway, there's a kitten in the road. I'm going to empathetically feel, oh my God, I want to save the kitten. But then reasonably, like I'm going to get hit by a car, right? So that's sort of the process through which I make ethical decisions.
Okay,
how do you constrained by reason?
Do you think that people can differ in their response to something empathically?
Yeah.
Is there a mediating principle that can tell you one person who's empathic and another person who's empathic that disagree, who's correct?
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think that's where we'd have to, talk it out, right? We do that in real life all the time when we have, whether that's a discussion with a friend about the right thing to do in a situation, whether that's a policy discussion about law, right? That's where we can converse with each other, think about things, explain our perspectives, and then kind of reach a conclusion, right? That I think that we do that all the time.
So Elijah, the prophet Elijah, defined God in the Old Testament as the voice of conscience within.
Okay.
That's a definition.
So you're saying by that definition of God, I see this kind of goes back to what I'm saying initially.
I'm not defining it. Elijah defined it.
Okay, so as Elijah defines God.
It's defined that way in Jonah too.
Okay, so as
Cardinal Newman also defined it that way.
As I'm sure you know many people who've defined it that way, and it's impressive. You're a very knowledgeable person.
I'm not trying to be impressive. I'm just pointing out to you how God is defined in the Old Testament.
All right. So to respond to that, I do think there are lots of interesting ways to define God. And that goes back to my kind of opening
Then how
statement.
do we specify what we're arguing about?
We use context clues, or again, it goes back to my example of the Mona Lisa.
I'm defining God as conscience.
Okay, so that's interesting, but then you're kind of expanding the meaning of God.
No, I'm not. That's how it's defined in the Old Testament.
Okay, so
in Elijah and in Jonah.
Sure. So whoever. So
it's not whoever.
Okay.
Elijah is one of the major
Right.
Old Testament prophets.
All right.
He's equal in stature to Moses.
Okay.
Right. So it's not arbitrary.
All right. So that is interesting, but it's not relevant to the context with which I am using the term God.
It's directly relevant. Atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting. You accept conscience as a guide, and conscience is one of the defining characteristics of God in the Old Testament.
I think you're being intellectually disingenuous.
In what way?
Because, again,
I asked you if you believe that conscience guided you.
You just asked me a question, and then you stopped me from answering it. In this setting, you understand the way I am using the term God and belief.
Not in the least. I don't understand how you're using it in the least. That's why I'm trying to define it. My definition of God as conscience is a lot more precise and oriented than your definition of the God that you hypothetically disbelieve in.
It's irrelevant to the fault lines of this debate.
How is it irrelevant?
Because in common parlance, when we're talking about atheists, God, belief, not belief,
I don't care about common parlance. I'm trying to get to something fundamental.
I think your point is irrelevant to the way that people tend to use these words. Your point that there are these polysemous
I didn't
ideas
make that
of God.
point. You did.
I
made a specific point that God was associated with conscience.
I just feel like you kind of retreat into this semantic fog.
I'm not retreating at all. I'm advancing, sir. You are retreating.
Okay. All right. Well, it was very nice to meet you.
Nice
I appreciate the
conversation.
Oh man, like Jordan is good at not saying anything, to be honest, and it's very hard to walk through this maze of, he's like fucking Neo dodging bullets. It's but this kid is not an atheist, whatever. Like from his premise at the beginning, what he's basically saying, as I understand it, he's basically saying that he believes in God, just not what religion says. In this case, let's say Catholics or Christians, not this all-knowing, all-powerful, like all of whatever, like all of the explanation, written explanation of God, that it's, in the Bible, not God is consciousness, like he said, but this kind of all-knowing, all-wise, and all that stuff. He's saying that he doesn't believe in that. So that doesn't make him an atheist. That makes him a guy who believes in God but doesn't follow any particular organized religion, I would say. But obviously he got owned because, if you define conscience as God, then you have to counter with no, conscience is not God, conscience is X, and we don't know what conscience is scientifically, or like that's hypothetical. That would be my answer to him. It's like, yeah, but that's hypothetical, what you're saying, that's your perspective. I cannot prove what conscience is, and neither can you. So the fact that you define God as conscience, that's the way that you see it. Like I see it as, being the devil's advocate here, I see it as years of evolution that helped us survive, that taught us that by being nice, especially him, he's a man, so being protective of the needy, when he made the cat example, that he wants to protect the kitten, being protective and being nice to people around him and to his community or whatever. So this could be survival, and your conscience saying don't do this, do that. This is the habit, doing it so often, the same, like you wake up and then your conscience tells you I need to take a shower. No, you've been doing it so every single fucking day in the morning, you go for a run, whatever it is, you wake up and then that's what comes to your mind. So, this is the way that I would answer him, that saying that God is conscious is also his perspective. Is that he has nothing to base that on. And yeah, we haven't, if their goal here by this claim of atheists don't understand what they're rejecting, if their goal is to define what God is, then they're never gonna get to here, because they don't even defining. You cannot, how can you understand something if like to this kid, let's put this example, to this kid on the right, he has a definition of God and he understands that definition and he's rejecting it. And even if we can put it into words, you know, that's the whole issue with this religious spiritual debate. It's all how you feel. It's inside of you. It's, you know, you cannot lie, you cannot say the truth. It's just what you feel, basically. So yeah, Jordan won that one, obviously. Let's give him a second point, and let's keep going. Before we keep going, let me just add that, like, the 2 times that Jordan won, it's not because of his arguments, it's because of the person sitting across was inept or, you know, not a good debater. But this is, again, the problem of these kind of debates. Like the first one, if you have a good person, a good debater on the other side, then the best you can achieve is a stalemate. The best you can achieve is an agree to disagree, and there comes faith, and there comes all of those things. We cannot prove any of this. So, you know, what we are proving is, we are not proving that Jordan's arguments are better. We are just proving that he's a better debater. So that's basically what it is. And I think we can use that argument for everybody else, you know, like the best debater will win when we're talking about does God exist. Otherwise, there's greater thinkers that in the past would have figured it out and find proof somehow, whether it is scientific proof or whatever, but some proof, you know. All right, let's keep going.
Yeah, it's very brave of you to do this.
Very brave. What an asshole, man.
My next
That's the other thing, man. He's behaving like such a dismissive, arrogant dick. It's very hard. It's really very hard to like him. Like, he's being so dislikable. He's being Douglas Murray in his debate against Dave Smith in the Joe Rogan Experience. Like, oh, you've never been, and all that shit, and oh, you're not an expert. He's very brave. What a fucking dickhead. What a... bleh.
claim is that morality and purpose cannot be found within science.
Interesting.
What is up, Mr. Canada?
How you doing, man?
I'm doing great.
What's
How are
your
you?
name?
Brian. I think it's interesting that you say that morality and purpose can't be found in science. Actually,
No, within science.
sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Purpose, I actually grant you, because purpose is subjective, right? Unless you want to boil it down to the purpose of life is just to procreate, right? Sure, whatever. Morality is actually something that we do see. We actually have examples of Neanderthals, and older individuals found in a tribe, missing an arm, missing teeth, still alive somehow in his 40s, 50s, right? Typically, you're a Neanderthal, you can't eat, you can't hunt, you die, right? But we know that members of his tribe were taking care of him, right? So we know that at some level, early in our evolutionary history, we actually developed altruism. We have examples of chimpanzees who actually have a basic understanding of fairness, right? If you give a chimpanzee 2 grapes, right, and his butt.
How much you wanna bet that he's gonna counter argue with, and who gave this to them? Why do they feel like this? Why do they have this feeling? Let's see if I nail it. Then a point to me. God damn it, if I nail this one.
He gets 3, right? He actually freaks out, right? But you give both chimps 3 grapes and they're good. We have examples of parrots.
Except for the greedy chimps.
Except for the greedy chimps.
They want 4 grapes.
They want 4 grapes. You know, those do exist, right? But we have similar examples where we do animal tests, right? And
So morality is intrinsic.
I think
So it precedes science.
that actually
right?
a better way to define it would be that social animals, which we are, right,
Yeah.
require some level of morality or
Into what? I'm not disagreeing.
Sure.
Why do they require that?
Because it's the only way that social groups can actually survive, right?
That's my point with
Sure.
regards to science. Thank you very much.
Is that
Precisely the point that you just made, that science has to exist within a moral framework that isn't in itself scientific.
how's that not scientific?
Well, because it's not derived from the scientific process, as you just
It
indicated.
doesn't need
by
to derive from
pointing
the
to-
scientific process.
Well,
It's
hang
the
on,
fact that
hang on a sec.
we are social animals, so we need that to exist as a group.
I
right?
agree, but
Sure.
you pointed to the morality of Neanderthals, to the morality of chimpanzees. They didn't derive that from science.
They don't need to. That's not how
That's
that
my
works.
point.
Science explains it. So
No, science doesn't explain morality.
it doesn't explain how.
That's my argument in other words. Science didn't give them this morality. Something else did. Yeah. Point for Rafa.
Social animals would need to be
Well, that's
altruistic.
a complicated question.
But we see it though.
Yeah, but explaining the evolution of morality and explaining morality itself aren't the same thing.
Okay, so you're asking why does this happen?
Yes, that's more accurate.
Because we're social animals and we
yeah,
need
but there's
to be...
more to it than that.
Is there?
Sure. For example, so we're moral animals that have a sense of the future.
Sure.
Okay, that makes us unique. And that structures our morality.
No, actually, there are other animals that can predict the future. Or not predict
really.
the future. No, tigers. Actually, there was a tiger at the SF Zoo that killed somebody. And so
hunting
actually...
animals...
No. Kids threw shit at the tiger. The tiger actually plotted its escape, and it found the kids.
I'm not saying that animals can't think.
Okay.
No, but they can
pause here.
perceive the future. That's what I'm saying.
Well-
Voted out by the majority.
Thank you, man.
Good man. Yeah.
Yeah, they didn't get anywhere. Yeah, I would give this a tie, I think, because the claim morality and purpose can be found within science. Well, that's not what he argued. What he argued is that science gives you this morality. But I mean, it's a very philosophical claim. Let's say can be found within science. What does that even mean? Like science can, anthropology, which is a science, and archaeology, which is a science, can both sociology, all of them can go back to the past, to the Neanderthals, cavemen, or whatever, and then through science we found out that this morality happened. Right? Like we know about all of this, what this kid is saying in the past because of science. Otherwise, God didn't taught us this, he didn't teach us this, right? So morality can be that, I guess. I mean, if he makes this, or if somebody makes that argument, he loses, because the argument is morality and purpose can be found within science. Well, because of science, we know that morality existed. Therefore, morality is found within science. Now, the claim that he's making, which is different, is what gives you morality? Does science give you morality? Or are we born with it and whatever? Which is a shitty, like, it's just like, we don't eat because science tells us that we're gonna die. We eat because we're hungry. Like I don't think we don't do anything because of science. We do it because we're human. Science is just an achievement of human beings. But I mean, yeah, you can find out that these foods are healthier for you, and therefore you behave this way because of science. But yeah, not our instincts, not morality, I mean, I know I'm lazy to go to the gym, but I have to go because it's good for me. I know it's good for me because of science. But, otherwise, I would be a piece of I mean, you know what I mean? It's, I don't think it's a good claim. And if somebody's smart enough, they can destroy it. I don't know. Let me know if you think my argument would destroy this claim, because, yeah, I think it is. I don't know. Oh, by the way, so, man, I think it's a tie as well. I think it's also a tie. Yeah, I would give it as a tie. Let's leave it 2-0.
Hey, Jordan Peterson. How you doing?
How you doing, man?
My name's Luke. Nice to meet
Good
you.
to see you, Luke.
So your claim that morality and purpose can only be found in science is a little shaky, because I think that your claim is really being framed to be morality and purpose can only be found in religion. Is that how you're kind of framing it?
I would say that the domain of religion is the domain of morality and purpose. Yes, exactly. Okay. And also that science is actually structured, at least in part technically, to eliminate such considerations from its purview a priori.
Okay.
Right? That's why we define science as value-free. Mm-hmm. But that has to be wrong, because scientists have to prioritize their attention towards something before they can even engage in observation.
Okay.
And that act of prioritization of attention is a value-predicated act. And so I can continue. There's all sorts of things we have to assume about science before it can take place.
Okay, so what I'm specifically pointing out here is about religion in particular, since you yourself are a Christian, right?
That's, people debate about that, and I generally don't discuss it publicly.
Okay, I understand that. And me, myself, I am a former young earth creationist fundamentalist.
Oh, yeah.
So I have experience in this. I used to run a TikTok channel directed about apologetics about the Bible, specifically in this type of facet with morality, evolution and such, and going back and forth with that. So in the Bible, it talks a lot about slavery, right?
Yes.
Yes. So in that, it teaches you how to take care of a slave. Rather than saying slavery is wrong, I think
No,
it
it
should
says
say
that in the story of Moses.
It says slavery is incorrect. It says
Well,
it's immoral.
that's why Moses leads his people away from slavery.
But why does the Bible predicate and tell people exactly how to take care of a slave? Isn't
Well,
that immoral? Wouldn't you say that culturally we've evolved as a species, as he said earlier about empathy?
Yeah, I would say that the reason we evolved, so to speak, away from slavery was because the West was founded on Judeo-Christian morality and the presumption that every person was made in the image of God.
Wouldn't you
And so
say
slavery itself became immoral, and that was established by Protestant Christians in the UK, who then convinced the UK government for 200 years to go to war on
And
slavery.
wouldn't you say that this is about the cultural evolution of humans in general, rather than just Christianity?
No, I think it's the flowering of the ideas that were embedded in the biblical texts across long spans of time.
I feel like this is just humans editing based on the cultural evolution
And what do you
of
mean
morality.
by just?
Just?
Yeah, just humans.
Well, humans.
Editing.
Well, based on culture and history, right? We get better.
Well, they did do it based on culture and history, but culture and history have their foundations too. So.
Well, yeah, but we're talking about slavery. So many people bolstered it based on the
Everyone
Bible. Based on the Bible. They
that's
looked at
much
it
less
and they
true.
justified it in the United States and the Deep South. They justified slavery
Yeah, but
based
the main
on the
thrust,
Bible.
the main thrust of Protestant thought in particular was stringently against slavery, and it was about the only movement in the history of the human race that had an anti-slavery direction.
Which was driven by humans and their
Well,
understanding
that's one
of
way of
morality.
looking at it. Well, it depends.
It's the same with women's suffrage. I mean, women's in the patriarchy.
What do you mean it was driven by humans? Humans drove slavery too.
Yes, exactly.
So there's no argument there. If slavery and anti-slavery were both driven by humans, what does your claim that they were driven by humans have to do with it?
Evolving morality based on the culture that within the society that they live.
Okay, fine.
So with
I
women's
think that did
suffrage as
happen.
well is a very similar topic in the Bible. There are denominations in Christianity such as Pentecostal movement which do bolster women to be pastors, right? Which I think that's a great thing to do. But most like to disregard
Where do you
women.
think the idea that human beings were sufficiently equal to all vote and not be slaves came from?
Humans.
Yeah, but so did the idea of slavery.
So did the idea of God.
Fine, but what's your point? Like, you're not making an argument. You're just saying all thoughts come from humans, regardless of the thoughts.
It's not driven by a higher power. It's driven on our experiences
Define
as
higher.
humans, which is what is best for all people.
Is it driven by conscience?
It could be. Which conscious is also something that has evolved over time, and I think that's something that does evolve in morality and empathy.
Okay, I don't understand the point that you're making.
My point is that God influenced slavery. People looked at the Bible and went, this is moral because God says so, just like women's suffrage.
There's lots
and
of
just like homosexuality.
All human societies were slave owning, so you can't blame that on the Bible.
If humanity decided...
Oh, wait, address that first.
What, about
all
slavery?
Human societies were slavers, so you can't blame that on the Bible.
Well, you can say it bolstered it.
Well, not if you look at the broad sweep of history, because it was the Protestant Christians
based
in
on their
the UK.
interpretation of the Bible.
It was the Protestant Christians...
Which evolves over time.
Let's pause there. You've been voted out by the majority.
Okay. Well, it was great talking with you,
nice
sir.
Oh man, I think the kid won, and he would have. Oh man, I think the argument. Correct me if I'm wrong, but my argument would be that if morality would be then given to us by God, I mean he's talking about the Bible, but I don't necessarily agree that the Bible is God, because humans wrote it, and regardless of how holy and how much of a saint these humans were, they're still human. And not only do they make mistakes as human, but they are also influenced, and they have their perspectives and their opinions. And then on top of that, you translate this document 100 times, and then It's interpretations, and it's like I read the Bible. I'm not saying that what is in there is a bad message or anything, but the fact, like the claim that it's a direct word from God, yeah, especially, the King James, the latest and the newest version that most people use nowadays. So yeah, man, like if the slavery example, actually that is a great example, but he just didn't bring it home at the end, that the holiest of books says that slavery is good. Now we know it to be bad. So basically our morality evolved. Actually, that is the argument that morality is in science, because we see it in the anthropological evolution, the cultural evolution, the sociological evolution. We see how slowly slavery turns into, illegal, banned in some countries, and frowned upon in the countries where it's not illegal. And yeah, I'm gonna give a point to the kid on this one. It's just a pity that he didn't bring it home at the end. Lack of experience, I guess. And yeah, I noticed something else also, the fact that he mentioned Protestant. So it's very convenient for him to, because he doesn't identify with anything specific, then he can use everybody's arguments. So yeah, well, he doesn't even identify as a Christian, but even if he would, he has, the Baptist, the Protestant, the Orthodox, like he can use all of this Christianity bubble information without getting corrected, because nobody can say, hey, but you're not Orthodox, are you? You're a Catholic or whatever. So yeah, I'm gonna give a point to the kid, to be honest. It's a shame he didn't bring it home at the end. Let me know if you think my argument is valid. Oh man, I wish I was sitting there, now. So 1 point to the students, and let's keep going.
Talking to you too.
Dr. Peterson?
Good to see you, man.
Pleasure.
What's your name?
Brian. So the first thing I would like to say is I would like to engage in this discussion in a symbiotic manner. I would not like to engage where there is one clear winner and one clear loser. Emotions are activated and it ultimately comes about ego. So I'm just saying I'm really trying to understand your position, and I would just like you to really try to understand my position.
Deal.
Okay, sounds good. With that, if you're saying that morality and purpose cannot come from science, is the opposite of that true, that morality and purpose can only come from God?
That's a way of defining it, yes.
Okay.
That's right, that's good. So I would say that with regard to the first claim, say, atheists don't understand what they're rejecting, because I would say by definition, God is the unity upon which moral claims are based. That's a definition, right?
Okay, if there is a God, what is the purpose of life?
Well, in the Christian tradition, the purpose of life is to engage in voluntary, upward, self-sacrifice so that the kingdom of heaven can be established on earth.
So you're trying to make it to heaven and avoid hell?
Yes, that's a good way of thinking about it.
What is the purpose of heaven? Do you understand?
Well,
so here's the deal.
We can get
into
it's the
an
opposite
infinite
of endless suffering. How about that?
And so should we not try to achieve infinite suffering on planet Earth? And if we can achieve infinite suffering on planet Earth without God, avoiding it, if we can do that without God, then does that defeat your claim?
Well, yeah, except that it doesn't. You circumvented my initial definition, because I said that by definition, God was the unified source of morality. And so if we engage in a moral exercise...
And when you're talking about morality, though, when you really reverse engineer it and you get it down to its root, you're a psychologist, it really seems like it just has to deal with motivation. People are saying there is a God,
It's more specific than that.
Well, so let me ask you this. So if there is a God and there is a moral code and it doesn't come at your benefit, are you going to follow it?
It depends on how you define your benefit. If you
If it's,
define your benefit,
if it's going to come at your expense, would you still
Define
follow
your
it?
expense.
If God came down and said, here is my moral code, and you should follow it, but even if you follow it, you are still going to end up in hell, are you going to follow it?
well, that was the question that was put to Job and to Christ, right? Because they were required. Hang on, I'm answering your question. They were required to withstand trials that would break anyone and maintain their upward orientation regardless.
And they did that with
Yeah.
the motivation of believing that this omnipotent, all-loving God would somehow turn it into a benefit. So they still did it solely for their benefit. So
No,
when you,
not, well,
yes,
let's
they
define,
did. Yes,
hang
they
on,
did.
hang on.
If-
Let's define benefit. Like, if I did something for your sister, would that be to your benefit? Like, how are you defining your benefit? Do you mean one of your whims gratified now? Or do you mean you and everyone you love and know over some reasonable span of time? Like,
So
what do you mean by you?
when you're talking about whims, I think you're talking about something that's more dopamine. When you're talking about morality, you're talking about something that's more serotonin and more ultimately satisfying. So you and I agree on a lot. I mean, when it comes to talking about how men should be masculine and things of that nature, you and I are 100% in agreement. We just don't agree on the justification that God is the only thing that provides morality.
It's not a justification, it's a definition.
What's the difference then between a definition and a justification? I mean, it's ultimately
No, I see.
psychologically the same thing.
Well, we have to define what we're talking about before we can debate.
Okay, well,
right?
so
And
here's
so
my
I
position.
said that God, among other things.
I'm actually a non-theist. I'm not an atheist. I believe the human condition is one of uncertainty. And what that means is that I don't believe that you can conclude there is a God with certainty, and I don't believe that you can conclude that there is a God without in the same position. Now, with that, I don't care. I still wake up every day, and I have motivation to be a moral person.
Define moral.
Moral, what I ought to do.
Okay, and how do you
And
come
what
to that
I ought to
conclusion?
do, ultimately, it comes down to what not just benefits me, but what benefits the entire planet, what benefits the entire system. I think that your entire moral perspective comes from linear thinking. And when you look at the reality of the universe, it's actually more so holistic. So when you look at how Aristotle defined God, when he said that there had to be an unmoved moved or an uncaused cause, he was defining God from a linear perspective. And you do the same with morality, and you do the same with purpose.
How does my
I
definition
reject
of
that.
morality? How does my definition of morality hypothetically differ from yours?
Because you're saying that there's something that exists in a vacuum, that it exists in and of itself, and nothing in the universe exists in a vacuum. Nothing exists in and of itself. It's a whole systems-based morality. It's a systems-based reality.
Is there a hierarchical
and that is
structure?
what the quantum.
Is there a hierarchical structure? Are some things more important than others?
Are some things, I think some things lead to more benefits than
Then,
others.
by your own definition, some things are more important than others.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay,
What is
pause there. You've been voted out by the majority.
That's a shame. But yeah, stalemate. You know, it's define this, define that, and like I don't want to go against those kind of nuances, because yeah, when you're having this kind of conversation, it's probably necessary to be that nuanced, to put every single word under the microscope. But I can also imagine that he's using it as an escape technique. I can also imagine, I would not be surprised if he's not doing it, not because he actually wants to get to the bottom of the argument, but he's doing as a bail. Is it like a cop out? Is it called? Well, it's a bailout. Could also be, I guess, to delay the conversation or avoid the main topic. And yeah, I already said in the preview, comment what I think of this claim. And this guy, I don't think he went much further than the guy before. And no, let's see if the new guy, is it the new claim already? I guess there's one more person. Let's hope that he makes my claim. That would be awesome. And see if it works. Stalemate. There's another draw. We still are 2-1. Let's keep going.
I appreciate it.
How you doing?
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
I guess since you said morality and purpose cannot be found in science, it would just depend on like what you're referencing. If you're saying a description of your psychological preferences would be considered within science, sure. But I don't think that you have to say that it comes from science in order to be like an atheist. As an agnostic atheist, I don't know if God exists and I don't believe that a God exists. And the only ones that I would really reject would be like the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good, perfect notion of God that plenty of Christians like prescribe themselves. So I guess
How is that relevant to this claim?
You're basing a position of morality and purpose in some like notion of God that isn't the same type of notion of God that typical Christians would prescribe. Your notion of God is
What typical Christians?
Yeah, typically when I talk to Christians, they say that they believe in an all-knowing.
How about Cardinal Newman, who defined God as conscience? He's a major influence on all of Catholic social theory. How about that Christian?
Sure. So do you believe in the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good notion of God?
What do you mean by believe?
Do you think it to be true?
What do you mean by
That's the circular definition. What do you mean
How
when
is
you
that
say
circular?
you believe?
How is that circular?
Because you added
Define
no
believe.
content to the answer by substituting the
He
word
doesn't
true
want to answer.
and believe.
I said you think it to be true.
All right. So if
What's
you
a belief?
believe something, you stake your life on it.
What do you mean by that?
You live for it and you die for it. That's what I mean by that. It isn't something that you say. It isn't something that's associated with logical consistency. It's not declarative. It's not propositional. It's not a figment of your imagination. It's the presupposition of your attention and your action. And you're either fragmented, in which case you worship multiple gods, or there's some unity at the bottom of it that makes you an unstoppable force.
Okay, so you're saying that you don't believe something if you wouldn't die for it?
Not really, no.
Okay. So then,
How would you define belief? Something you say?
Can I explain? Like, I could believe it is the case that this pen exists, but if someone like threatened my life, right, I would lie in order to be able to save my life, right? Like, I think you would do that too. You wouldn't lie to save your
Don't
life?
be so sure.
You wouldn't lie to save your life?
How much do you know about me? I didn't lie to save my career. I didn't lie to save my clinical practice.
Would you lie to like save your children, your mom, your dad?
I don't think lying would save them.
No, can there ever be a circumstance logically that lying could save someone?
Yeah, and if you're steeped in sin, you're likely to live in circumstances like that.
I'll give you an example. If you're like in like Nazi Germany, and it is the case that there's like Jewish people in your attic and you're trying
I
to
know
protect
the
them,
example.
would you lie to like the Nazis? If
I
they're
would have
asking?
done everything I bloody well could, so I wouldn't be in that situation
you
to
lie?
begin with. It's a hypothetical, and it's
You
not
can't answer
answerable.
hypotheticals?
Of course, it's hypothetical.
No, I can't answer a hypothetical like
What?
that because
Did
it's
you eat
far.
today?
Look,
Did you eat
don't
today?
play games.
I'm not playing a game. I'm just
Yes,
asking if you
you
ate
are.
it today.
If you present me with an intractable moral choice that's stripped of context and you back me into a corner, you're playing game. I just told you
Hypothetical?
I would do everything that I could to make sure that I'm never in that situation. By the time you've got there, you've made so many mistakes that there's nothing you can do that isn't a sin.
Being born in Nazi Germany and trying to protect people that you care about, like there could be a Jewish friend that you have and you want to protect them.
I think you should
have
just
them in
give
your
up on
attic.
that line of questioning.
Give up on just like trying to clarify your position? Because
I
you don't
did
like, are you like
clarify it.
uncomfortable with me asking this question? It's just a basic hypothetical. Like I could ask you.
It's just a basic
yeah,
hypothetical
like
where you
like if
put Jews' lives at stake in Nazi Germany.
my God.
That's just a basic hypothetical.
Obviously, you would lie in that scenario to save their life, but you're like not trying to answer this question for some reason.
I just told you why.
Are you anti-fascist? Like, so you're
Why are
anti-fascist?
you asking that?
I was just asking, just clarifying. But like, okay, again, you're not answering this hypothetical because you know it shows that you clearly would lie to save
I'm
someone's life.
answering it in
Obviously,
a
that's
manner
not what
you
truth
don't
is.
find acceptable.
Obviously, because I care about truth.
I wouldn't be in that scenario.
Obviously, right? Logically, because that's
No.
already happened. Like that's in the past. You don't have a time travel device. We're bringing this logical hypothetical up to show you that in some circumstances that do happen within the real world, you would lie to save people's lives. So your definition of truth isn't actually how we're typically using it. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to muddy the waters when I ask you, like, do you believe this? Do you think this to be true? So you don't actually have to answer the questions. And plenty of Christians don't like that because they clearly see that you don't really like want to be associated with
I can
Christianity. with that
imagine
respect.
that I was in a situation where the best I could do as a consequence of my previous mistakes was to tell the least amount of lie I could manage.
Okay,
but
fine.
that would likely indicate that I had made all sorts of catastrophic errors on my way there.
So
Right.
you would lie to save someone's life. So again, you do believe it to be true in that circumstance, even though you lied in that scenario. So
Not
clearly that's
without
not what
the
you see to be true.
context that I put it in.
You were not willing to
I
die for it. You
said-
were not willing to let other people die for it. So that's not what you see to be true then, seemingly.
You're doing exactly what I said you were doing at the beginning of the conversation. You're generating an impossible, restricted, hypothetical with no precursors to back me into a
How's
corner.
it possible? Is there something contradictory about it? Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you too.
Great conversation.
Oh my god, that the kid won this one. The kid won this one, and he got a butthurt, man. Like,
How's
Corner.
it possible? Is there something
look how he
contradictory
shakes
about
his
it?
hands.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you too.
Great conversation.
Yeah. My
oh man, yeah, he took it personal. He was pissed. He took it personal. He tried to use cop-outs like you put in use in danger, and it's just a hypothetical, bro. Like he's opening the back door and escaping through the back door just to avoid saying that, hell yeah, I would lie, of course, to save someone's life. You know, in this case, a Jewish friend hiding in the attic during Nazi Germany. It's like, what's the problem? The problem is that I think that he connects morality with truth. So like lying is immoral immediately, which, yeah, you can go into that conversation, and there's good arguments on both sides. Like this kid just gave one on the side of lying is not necessarily immoral. But it was not what the argument was about. It was about science, not truth and lies. But I still think the kid won. And you can see it about how flustered he got. You don't even have to... You could watch this in mute and know that Jordan lost this one. So, non-professionals too, and the professional is also on too. Let's keep going.
My next claim is that everybody worships something, including atheists, even though they might not know it.
Hi.
Good work.
Thank you.
Hi there.
I'm Zena. So I want to start off with like defining terms.
Yep.
How do you define worship?
Prioritize.
Prioritize. So almost like having a preference over something rather than the
It's a
other.
hierarchy of preferences.
Yeah.
And you use it to direct your attention.
Right.
So whatever you're attending to, you're worshiping.
Right. So I've kind of become a little bit familiar with your idea of like this value-laden hierarchy.
Yeah.
Right. And you kind of posit that at the bottom of this hierarchy, or you call it top or bottom, I
Yeah,
suppose. At the bottom of this hierarchy, this foundational priority in your life is going to be considered God.
That's
is that
right.
correct?
Yes.
Right. I'm trying to imagine a situation in which could there be that someone has a priority at their foundation that is different from someone else's?
Oh, definitely.
Right. So we can have different conceptions of God.
That's why we fight.
Right. So essentially, there's not one God, but there are multiple gods, and these gods exist in some realm of truth. It's true that this person has one God and it exists.
Yeah, probably better to think about it as multiple values, but that there's a hierarchy of values with something at the bottom.
Right. But at the bottom is God, and
That's a definition, yeah.
Yeah. So at the bottom is God,
Yeah.
and there can be multiple people with different conceptions of God, and they're each valid in being called God. So there are multiple gods that exist.
It depends on what you mean by valid. So far, so good, but it depends on what you mean by valid, because I would say that some foundational conceptions don't play out when they're implemented. So if you put the wrong thing at the foundation, you end up in hell, for example. That's what happens in totalitarian states.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're saying
So they're not all equal. Like all foundational principles are not equal, even
Right.
though they might be equally foundational. Right.
So what makes one kind of foundational tenet like better than another one?
That's an excellent question. Iterability. Imagine that you play a game with someone and you're a kid, and it's fun. So then you play again and again and again.
So
Well, then
repetition.
it's playability across multiple iterations. So then you have a friend, and a friend is better than having a game. Right? So that's one. Breadth of application is another. So if it's just for me now, It's not as good as something that would be benefit to both of us across time.
Right. So we're explaining like characteristics that can be applied to like these types of like foundational values. But why is it that this iterability makes it better, and what does better mean?
Well, one hallmark of better is likely to be selected voluntarily.
Right.
So it's invitational.
Another descriptive kind of quality. So we're talking about characteristics that in some type of system with a goal, an output being like, we could maybe say happiness, right? Or some type of
harmony.
Harmony, right?
Yeah, that's better. Not happiness precisely, because it's too short term.
Exactly. So as someone who is an atheist, right, I can explain that within a system, there are things that we can see as better or worse to meet this goal or meet this output. But what we're interested in, though, is what could make these things, regardless of any system, right?
Well, imagine that you set up a system and you implement it, and it produces the opposite results to which you intend. Oh yeah, that's not a good system.
Exactly.
Right, so the foundational principles are lacking because when you implement them, the game degenerates instead of moving towards the aim.
Right, so we're talking about within a system. When we talk about something being moral, right, just absolutely moral, it means that without a system, right, this thing is simply moral with no reason. Like, stance independent, this thing is good. So I'm trying to figure out if such thing can exist. And if so, do you believe that these things are moral in of themselves, like self-evidently moral, or are they moral in accordance with the system?
I can't define them any more accurately than I already did, really.
Okay. In regards to morality, when we talk about the divine, when we talk about God and religion, these moral tenets and religion, right, and God exists as good because it is God, right? So it's self-evident, right? Without any kind of goal or output, this thing is good. So I want to figure out how...
There's an element of that that's true. So for example, in the story of Job, Job is unfairly tortured in consequence of a bet between God and Satan. And so Job is emblematic of someone who's being hurt for no apparent reason. Okay, so Job's response to that is that he refuses to lose faith in himself, and he refuses to lose faith in the ultimate goodness of being. Okay, and those are axiomatic decisions. They're not exactly evidence dependent because he is suffering. There's an arbitrariness in that that's reminiscent of what you claim.
So I'm essentially trying to figure out, do you believe that something can be good, like stance independently, something that can be good?
I don't know what you mean by stance independent.
Okay, so
you mean independent of people?
Independent of people. We can use that, or more so, I want to be more specific. Something that can be good, right, regardless of any end goal. It's just good.
No, I think good is tied up with goal.
Goal, okay. I completely agree. So in a sense, this is why...
That's why the religious goal in Christianity is the establishment of the kingdom of heaven on earth. It's goal dependent.
Okay, right.
So it's in reference to a goal.
So,
or the goal would be the imitation of Christ.
Someone's goal, right, can be something that doesn't encompass being in congruence with God or being with God.
No, the thing that they want to be in congruence...
Oh, right, okay. It is God.
That's right. That's right. That's good. That's great. The thing they want to be in congruence with is fundamentally equivalent to their God.
So what makes someone a Christian and what makes someone not a Christian? What makes like that's what I'm trying to figure out, because
that's a good question.
Yes.
Yeah, well, probably the deepest answer to that is willingness to shoulder your cross voluntarily and trudge uphill regardless of circumstances.
Okay, so someone can have a God, because in your definition, your first preference, that is God, right? So someone can believe in God, right, and not be a Christian, right?
Yeah, well, there's a statement that Christ makes in the Gospels. He says, not everyone who says, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven.
So not that they're even saying that they believe in God, but they just...
No, but that's why I'm saying this to you, is that Christ himself points out that there's a difference between people who say they believe and people who act it out. And the fundamental issue is the action rather than the stated belief.
But he also says that, to be saved, right, you must believe God has died for your sins, or that God has resurrected in some way. So it's like, I don't necessarily think that we can take from the Bible and say that like acting in accordance with God necessarily means, or acting in accordance with, the principles of God, like for example, sacrifice, like you talk about, means that you are Christian. I don't see how you can get that from that interpretation and then, kind of justify it as the truth.
I don't think that the fact that you sacrifice is sufficient to make you Christian.
So can we repeat once again what you believe makes someone Christian?
Yeah. There's many things, but one of the most fundamental is that you believe that the cosmos itself is founded on the principle of voluntary self-sacrifice. Best founded. Let me offer you a contrary example. So I could assume that power rules. And so that my assumption would be, if I can make you do it, I win. Right, and I can found a whole society on that, and that happens a lot, by the way. And that's also how societies tend to degenerate. And so that would be a society that was founded on the principle that you get to sacrifice and I don't have to. Right, now the contrary to that would be something like you give up voluntarily and with courage all the things you need to situate yourself properly in relationship to the future and other people. Right. So then there's a harmony. That's why I talked about harmony earlier.
So you navigate your life, right, in accordance kind of to this principle of self-sacrifice. Can I say it in that way?
Yes, you can definitely say it that way. That's exactly right. And navigate is the right term.
So someone does not have to have any awareness of Christ, of the story of Jesus, but let's say 60% of their actions, right, or more, whatever kind of metric you want to use, are in line with this self-sacrificial.
So the Christian thinkers of the Middle Ages dealt exactly with that problem when they were talking about the pre-Christian philosophers, for example. And they noted the similarity, let's say, between pre-Christian Greek thought and later Christian thought, and presumed that there were moral actors outside the Christian domain.
Right. So is that person Christian, though? Is that person Christian?
To some degree, again, that's a matter of definition, because they wouldn't be proclaiming Christian propositions, but they're acting out the pattern. Right. So you imagine that full Christianity would involve a dozen things. And you can imagine someone who knows nothing of Christianity, say, acting out 8 of them.
Right.
So then they'd be 8/12 Christian or something like that.
Christian. Well, but to be like a full Christian, how can someone say I am Christian? Like I am Christian, not 8/12, but Christian.
Well, I hesitate to do that personally, because I think it's the kind of goal that you be very careful about proclaiming. The technical.
But belief is not necessarily, to be mostly Christian, belief is not necessary. 8/12s or, right?
Well, it depends on what you mean by belief. See, because I would say that acting out the pattern is the deepest form of belief. Now, you could add to that what you say. So, maybe in the optimal situation, how you act and what you imagine and what you say, they're the same, right? But you can imagine a hypocrite who says all sorts of wonderful things and does nothing, and you could imagine another person who acts in a very positive manner but proclaims nothing.
So what I'm kind of seeing is like a descriptive, a really comprehensive but descriptive analysis of human action, human thought, and by which we can characterize people and put people in boxes. But I don't see...
Why in boxes?
Like, when I say in boxes, I mean like I can categorize you based on your actions, not based on necessarily what you say, but based on your actions that you are more so or less so Christian, right? Things like that, right? So we can categorize people as Christian.
Well, I would say more or less voluntarily self-sacrificing.
But that's also what we came to, though, is that someone can be like 60% or 70% Christian based on simply just acting in that way.
Yeah, Richard Dawkins is like that.
I watched that debate.
Let's pause there. We've been voted out by the majority.
Very good.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, this was a conversation. I don't really think anybody won or lost. Actually, they were not even talking about the main claim. I already noticed this happens a lot. They are not debating the main claim. They are debating something parallel to the main claim, or they zoom in. So in this case, they were debating whether someone is Christian or not. Has not nothing to do, but it has nothing to do. It's not that it has nothing to do, man. I don't know how to explain myself. It's not entirely the argument of everybody workshops something, because Muslims worship something, Jews worship something, even I don't know, like tribes in the jungle, they worship the sun, all that stuff. And so has not much to do with Christianity, this claim from the beginning, now that I notice, actually. Of course everybody worships something, I agree with that, including atheists. Well, yeah, it's obvious. Like I wouldn't even try to debate this, because I agree. I agree with the claim that everybody worships something, including atheists. Because if you're not worshiping God, you're worshiping yourself. You're worshiping basically yourself. You could also worship your dog or whatever, or your family, or even worse, pop stars, you know, or sports athletes, whatever. So there's of course this I agree 100%. There's but I don't think this was yeah, this is a stalemate in my opinion. I see it more as a conversation. They were just trying to figure out what a Christian is, basically. So yeah, let's keep going.
Really, very thoughtful.
Hey, Dr. Peterson.
How are you doing?
Oh man, this is the kid. This is the kid from the clip. Now it's possible that he sat twice there, because I have noticed that some people try to get to the chair even though they already debated. So maybe he sits down for the second time, but I think this is it. And yeah, you know, we are about halfway through and we've been filming for almost 1 hour and 15 minutes. So I'm gonna leave it until here for today for the part 1, and I will publish part 2 tomorrow. So yeah, thanks a lot for hanging out on this part 1 of the Jordan Peterson Jubilee, and I can't wait to see you tomorrow for the second part. Thanks very much for hanging out, gringos, gringas, beaners and beanerettes, and take care.